Morning folks, Kevin here. Well, it's Saturday, June 16th, 2018. I'm out next to the central garden plot where there's, I think, 8 permanent raised beds with 16-inch paths in between. I recently posted a video showing how I set up the transplants. A lot of these are peppers and tomato plants. So they're all single row on these permanent raised beds, which allows us to use drip irrigation with a single drip tape going down the row right at the base of each one of the plants, and then also being able to set the weed mats so that they cover the paths and half of each one of the permanent raised beds. So 2 weed mats will completely cover, with the exception of about maybe a 1/2 inch to 1 inch wide area where the 2 mats meet in the center of each permanent raised bed. In the past, Tim from Tim's Homestead had requested some more information about drip irrigation, and today's video is going to be covering some of the drip irrigation systems we have. I thought it'd be wise to talk about. I've only had first off, I'll mention a couple of companies which I have no affiliations with, and this is my 3rd year running drip tape or drip tape drip irrigation. Now, for years I've used soaker hoses, and probably many of you are familiar with soaker hoses, and there's many different, well, there's at least 3 different types of soaker hoses out there, and they're a much less expensive alternative. And similar to drip tape irrigation, it does conserve water. It gets water in the location that you really want it, the targeted zone. So you're not watering paths, you're not watering weeds, you're basically trying to water the plants that the annual garden plants that you want to have. The advantage of soaker hoses over drip tape is, drip tape, when you lay it down, these are linear, straight lines. You should be running drip tape in straight lines. Where soaker hoses allow you to serpentine. You can go around corners, you can do spiral beds, you can do all sorts of interesting irrigation using soaker hoses. And I'm not poo-pooing soaker hoses, because I think they still have their place, but they have to be installed in such a way that decreases that increases the longevity of the soaker hoses when they're installed. And today's video isn't about that, but I wanted to mention that I have used soaker hoses for years, and I still think they have their role in gardens, and I think it's a much less costly alternative to the drip irrigation, the drip tapes that we're using today. I also use overhead irrigation sprinklers, and you've seen in some of the recent videos that in our western garden, we're using the overhead irrigation to start to enhance seed germination, like with carrots and with other plants as well. But it's more wasteful. It requires greater pressure. I can't water as large an area simultaneously unless I have a great big pump, and I'm just using our well pump to do this. So you need multiple zones if you got larger areas if you're doing overhead irrigation. Now, I've done that for years. It just means that there's more opportunities for things to go wrong potentially on your systems. And there are great overhead irrigation sprinkler systems out there, and I've got several of them. But depending on the hardness of your water, they can be more problematic over time as well. And so I'm not poo-pooing those. I think they have their role, and I use them as well. So now that I've got that out of the way, the drip irrigation. So one drawback is you need to have them in straight lines, and if you've got permanent raised beds, or you've got any sort of straight line planting system, the drip irrigation system works well. Ideally, setting up your garden design in a way that where the beginning of each one of the rows and the end of each one of the rows, those lines, are are parallel to each other. In other words, they're square. Your beds are set up in blocks that are rectangles or square or something of that nature. And that way the drip tapes will all be the same length, and therefore you can have what I call a double header. And I'll go over these terms when I'm actually doing the installation of this bed. But I have several of these, so I'm just going to go around and just show you, while the sun's where it's at, what each one of our setups look like, and then I'll go through the parts of it. I forgot to mention one thing. So morning time is one of the times that I love being out in the garden, but it's a very, very important time for me to be out in the garden, because I do my morning walk around all of the market garden, the kitchen garden areas, and go through and really take a good close look at what's actually going on in these systems. Are there any, and with respect to irrigation, we're looking for, did the irrigation system work? Did the batteries and the timers run out? Are there any leaks? Did the end caps come off of the drip irrigation system? Did an animal come in and chew through some of the irrigation system and create a hole where there's a pool of moist soil where possibly some of the plants didn't get watered and all? So you're looking for failures in those. The other failures in your drip irrigation system to adequately irrigate each one of the plants in your garden. You spend all this time and energy getting these plants started and then transplanted and getting to a certain point, then lo and behold, it's a challenge. With using weed mats, I think it's important to set yourself up so that you can actually determine if there are leaks as well, by really knowing how to set up your irrigation so you can determine, geez, there's a leak right here and the plants on the other end of this row didn't get irrigated. The other thing that's really important during that morning walk, for me anyways, is looking for pests, looking for animals that are coming in and disrupting the system. Like, we're just ending the time when all the turtles, so snapping turtles, can come in and they like going to the higher points. And they can, you know, take down some of the fencing. The deer could have jumped the fencing, whatever it is. Or we're looking for signs of pests that are kind of come in and the caterpillars are showing up, or a beetle is there, an unwanted pest that you want to get a head start with as well. So those are just a couple of thoughts. I think those are characteristics that can be developed that enhances you as a gardener's success, and also enhance your intellectual growth. You'll be able to understand more. You can do some research and find out, well, what is this pest? Or what's a better way of terminating each one of these drip tape systems so it's less of a chance of the end blowing off and all. So enough with that. I'm going to turn around and show you this. So in a couple of moments I'll be going through each one of these components, but what this is our most eastern garden irrigation central point. So we have water coming into, on the left hand side over here, water coming in with a garden hose, actually coming from the hydrant right there. So that comes in, feeds PVC piping, that's 1-inch PVC piping, goes through a filter system, and I'll go through each one of these components, then goes down ultimately through a pressure reducing piece of plumbing, and then going into a multi-zone orbit timer, automated timer, so that I can make sure that each one of the garden beds, whether it's this zone right in here and that hoop trellis over there, let me see if I can, which you've seen in other videos, we've been working on that area. So that's all one zone, and the beds over on the other side where the kidney beans are as well. That's one zone. Another zone is this whole area over here. And then we just have a couple more zones, but I'm not going to go through all the zones at this time. Let's go over and look at another one of our setups. So I'm over here on the western side of the western garden plot, over here. Let me just show you. So down here we have 2 rows of corn. We have a row of carrots, which the sprinklers are straddling right now. The leeks over here, over on the next to the chain link fencing, which are kennel panels, are all of the what do we have there? We have hostaberry, one plant, we have currants, and we have the thornless blackberries, all in pots in the wood chips. Over here we have the various beans growing up over the trellises, some various herbs, oregano, basil over there, and sage. So all of those things started in this area. So with this irrigation system, it's very similar. I have it mounted on the wall. These are still temporary systems. I know what I want to do ultimately, but this is for this season until I get the plumbing all set ultimately. But we have a hose feeding PVC coming in, going through a filter system, then going through a pressure reduction system, and then going into an orbit 3 stations here. So, and each one of these stations, since these are overhead watering systems, each one of these sprinklers here, the pressure required, I can't run all 3 of these at the same time and get the span that I need to get all of the plants adequately watered. So by using 3 different watering zones on this western plot, I can get all 3 sprinklers to run in series during the middle of the night, and that takes care of the irrigation. This will get switched out, so there'll only be 1 zone that feeds this whole system because the pressure required is much less, and we're having a pretty decent volume going through. So all of these plants can be watered with 1 zone at one time and be more specific or more accurate as far as watering the plants that I've actually intended to be watered. But for right now, because I really want to enhance the germination of the carrots that are down in this bed here, that's really important. And you can see some of the carrots are germinating. Let me see if I can. So there's some carrots germinating there. Now I wish I had come through and had the time to run the flame weeder down here 2 days ago, because that would have been an ideal time. But I didn't. Got a little too busy doing other things. So here I am over here in the central garden. This is a unit that we're going to go through in a little while. And I'm missing one key part here. I just noticed that I forgot to put my pressure reducer on before going to the timer. This will be a single zone. All of these beds will be able to be watered with a single zone, as a single zone. That's the header here that's going to feed each one of the drip tapes, and I'll take you through the parts that we use to set up the drip tapes here. And this is going to be a single header as opposed to a double header. If the ends of the bed, but that end of the garden way over there actually curves around with the driveway, so each one of these, well, the first 4 beds are almost the same length, but the rest of the beds are not the same length. They get shorter as we go further east there. And therefore, having a double header is very difficult to set up without using a lot of extra costly parts as well. So in this system, this is being fed by a garden hose. If this was hooked up to the spigot of your house, you'd want to have a backflow restrictor, which decreases the chances of water, let's say rain, getting into your system. Now drip tape I don't think you have to worry about, but that would decrease the chances of contaminants such as fertilizers and pesticides, none of which we use here, getting back into your household water supply system. You know, in other words, the contaminants will flow down the pressure gradient, which I think is very unlikely. But that's one thing I would say if you're hooking up to your spigot outside of your house. So in this situation, what I have is a 3/4 inch hose supplying PVC that's going to go to a filter system. So the first part here is a hose to pipe adapter. So since I'm using 1-inch PVC, I want that larger volume. I have a 1-inch PVC coupler. On one side it's threaded, on the other side it's a glue fitting, and then it has either a male or a female hose connector. With this case here, this is a female and this is a male. So the male has the threaded components. Hopefully this is showing up. And I got most of these supplies from DripWorks. And this is not sponsored by or a commercial for DripWorks or Drip Depot. I've gotten other parts from Drip Depot. But this is the weak link in the whole system that I've had. Whoever they're getting their PVC to their pipe to thread to hose adapters is doing a very poor job of gluing in between, because most of these that I ordered, and I've got 20 of these, 25 of these, they leak. So that is a problem. So there's little bits of drip here. So I've got to find these hose adapters that go to 1-inch glue-on fittings, and if anyone knows where I can find them, put a link in the comments below. I'd really appreciate it. But this is the one big fault that I've had with DripWorks, and it may be with many manufacturers, because someone's manufacturing these and then selling them to a company like DripWorks. So the first part is the hose to pipe adapter. Then whatever the situation is. Now often people will show in their diagrams before the filter this hose to pipe adapter going, but I didn't want the garden hose to get pinched. The greater the degree of deflection or angle that there is, there's more resistance and therefore decreased flow rate, which affects the volume of water that's going to feed through that system. And again, you want, in order to maximize the accuracy of delivering the appropriate amount of water to the plants at the most distal, the furthest away from the source of water, you really want to reduce restrictions. And these bends, if the hose bends going to the system, that's worse. And eventually this whole system will be covered up when these are all mounted on the wall and I have a permanent system. This is just on a T-post, a system that I made for here. But so going from the hose to the PVC, we have a hose to pipe adapter. These are all 1-inch on my system. Then it's a short piece, and this is a PVC glue to threaded adapter with a piece of 1-inch PVC, a 90-degree elbow, another piece of PVC, another 90-degree elbow. I've got some straps on it, the conduit straps to hold the system. That way, although these are 90 degrees, if you could do 45s, that would even be better. So these are two restrictions here, but at least it's 1-inch PVC. Then a glue-on fitting here that is a pipe adapter. Now this is a Y filter, so this filter actually, when you turn the water supply off here, you can go ahead and turn this off, and it's a simple screen filter that can be flushed out and reused over and over again. And here's an accessory port. You may have seen me watering the garden. This accessory port will allow you to have a second hose hooked up as well. So if this is hooked outside your house, you're going to say, geez, I still want to be able to wash the car. You can use this adapter as well. Then now the next part is another one of these pipe to hose adapters, and you just have to think about what you're going to next. In this case, I'm using an Orbit timer, and I'll put a link in the description to some of the components that I'm talking about today, and they're Amazon affiliate links. So if you click on it and you buy something at the same time after you've clicked on the link, I'd get a penny or two or 3 pennies per dollar to help support our efforts here. So that's always appreciated if that's something you want to do to help support us. It doesn't cost you a penny more if you buy these things through Amazon. I really like the Orbit timers. Are they perfect? No, I have one timer right now that I have troubles with one of the manifolds that comes off the timer. One of the timers that come off one of the 4-unit systems. I've had to reset it a bunch of times. But otherwise, I'd say these are some of the best timers out there if you're doing a small scale system and not doing a big greenhouse automation system. So we have this pipe to hose adapter, then you put your timer on, and then at the other side of that we have the pressure reduction system. So first we're maintaining the greatest amount of volume possible by reducing restrictions, having the largest diameter pipe that we can in our system. If you're hooked up to your spigot, you want to have a backflow reduction system as well, reducer, eliminator. And then we have our timer set there that's automated. You can set it for the middle of the night like we do here. And then we have our next part, which is our pressure reduction. So this drip tape system really just requires 12 pounds per square inch. And geez, our house, I think we go from, I think it's 28 to 42. I'd have to look at my pressure tank that comes off our well and see. So the pressures increase and decrease because there's an air bladder in the tank, so the pump doesn't have to be running continuously. But anyways, the next part is your pressure reducing, because too much pressure is going to either blow off the ends or damage the system or cause leaks at where the each one of the drip tapes hook on to the headers. Okay, so now, and this is a hose fitting at each end. The other thing I would say is with many of the systems that you're going to buy, let's say this was a female, it's going to have those cheap black plastic washers in them, and in my opinion they suck. So I always buy, each year I buy a couple packs, and I don't know, I think there's about 20 of these in there. Let's see, is this going to show up? I'm hoping that shows up. These are red rubber washers. They come in packs, I think like 20. And I just say every single season, go ahead and change these red rubber packs at every single hose connection you have. So a quick tip. Okay, so next I'm going to show you how we attach our poly header line, which is, in our case, we're using 3/4 inch header line. And this is where the drip tapes are going to come off of, but you get this roll of this header line. Most people use 1/2 inch, I'm using 3/4 inch. Again, the higher the volume after coming to this, the pressure's been reduced, but a lot of volume can be fed out to your system, and you can have multiple drip tapes or drip irrigation systems coming off of this header as long as you've got the volume there. So 3/4 inch is what I go with. In this case, this has to be basically a T-fitting system, so that this could hook on to your timer or your pressure reducer, and you could feed 2 header lines going off each way, depending on how your setup is. In this case, it's just one-sided, so it's like this, and you can get them as 90-degree angles. They can be straight fittings. So this is a straight fitting. This is very similar to the one that's there, but this is 1/2 inch. And this is 3/4 inch. So this comes in a big roll. Leave it out in the sun for a few minutes so it warms up a little bit. Make sure that the locking threaded part on this unit is all the way back, all the way towards the hose connection. Then you just work the poly line on it. You may twist it some to get it all the way up on there. Then what I do is I just hold the poly line and hold the other end there together, and then start threading this down. And what this is doing is it's running over the poly line that's over the barb. So we got this barbed fitting at one end, underneath this rather, this barbed fitting that we put the hose over, the poly line over. Now we're going ahead and we're threading this and pinching the poly line between the barbed end and this threaded collar that locks down, if that makes sense. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just, sorry, wrong way. So I'm turning this and it's pulling away from the actual hose connection or the timer connection. And now this is adequately pinched a section of the header line or the poly line between this threaded locking apparatus and the barb underneath. And now that's locked on there and it's not going to leak. And again, gentle sweep, so there is a 90-degree, but it's not an acute angle where I'm going to pinch this, where it's going to create more resistance. You want it to be a sweep, a really gradual sweep when it comes out of this system. No kinks in your line. So on the rest of the header, and you may make manifolds similar to this. This came off of one of the irrigation beds where it had carrots in a row. So the drip tape went out for each row of the carrots, or it was some other. And so you'll see in market gardeners, they'll make up multiple small heads like this and have a T-port that comes off, and they can shut off the whole head so that, let's say they have arugula, radishes, beets, turnips, salanova mixed, various lettuces. They may have 5 or 9 rows of these small, rapid growing products in their permanent raised beds. And they'll have this whole header that feeds each one of those drip tapes. And often there's another header at the other end, so that if one of the lines get kinked because of whatever happens during the daytime or night, the flow through the other drip tapes that gets to the other header will backfeed water into the system. So there'll be like double systems like this. Now if you buy a kit system, and I'll be showing this in a minute, how I actually attach these to the header pipe. But if you were to buy a kit system, chances are you'll get this type of fitting. And that means that if there's a problem, if an end gets blown off a drip tape, or an animal pokes through it, or you stick a garden staple through it, or something happens to a drip tape, or you've harvested the crop in that row and you just want to turn that off, you've got to go back, shut off the whole system and plug this hole, or remove the whole header system. Whereas with these, which costs, I don't know, a little bit more, the type with a shut-off valve on it, so now it's open, water is going to that particular bit of drip tape, and now it's closed. So I can shut off various beds or groups of drip tapes in a bed as necessary. As opposed to this one, I've got to shut the whole line off in order to repair or shut down that bed. So this is what you'll get if you get a kit. This is what you get if you buy the components separately. And I bought kits. And then I found out I'm not going to use these. And it's the same thing with the end caps. You can use one of these as an end cap, which can allow you to periodically blow the line out. So you can, even though it's the end of a drip tape, if you're worried about contaminants or dirty, or it's springtime and you've let the tape be overwintered, you can use one of these shutoff valves for the end. If you're using a double header system, in other words, having this at each end of a bed, by having these open to one another, what you're doing is you're allowing the water to go from one header through the drip tape and feed into the other end of the header. And if there's a kink in this line halfway down the bed and you have this one open, well, the water will backfeed and you get water supplied from both ends of the bed. I hope that makes sense the way I just described it. DripWorks and Drip Depot, I think, both use this, and I think this is a very good product. This is made by Toro. It has a special apparatus built into this poly line all the way down, and you probably can't see it. It's just way too close. But if you look up AquaTrack by Toro, you'll be able to see how this actually works. These are 1/2-inch drip tape systems, and they come in different sizes. And there's emitters every frequency, whatever the frequency is. And because we do different crops, it's either 6 or 8 inches. I think this is 8 inches. So, and this just does nice little drips. If the blue tape is up and you lift up the tape, you'll see drip, drip, drip coming down below that, which as opposed to an overhead irrigation system, you're not exposing so much of those droplets to the atmosphere. And if you're using a weed mat, well, this is underneath the weed mat, and there's much less evaporation. So there's a great deal of water conservation. You're not watering the weeds necessarily. You're becoming more precise with the delivery of water to the intended plant that you want to get watered, if that makes sense. And this drip tape goes on the system just like the rest of the system. It's a threaded system, so I just make sure that this locking nut is all the way back towards the valve itself. Take the drip tape, slide it over the barbed end, and it slides on real easy. You can see how easily that slides on. Then while I'm holding this, one of the things I would say, there happens to be an emitter right here at this end. This is going to leak because it's designed to emit water right there, even if it's under this compression. So you see drips right at this spot, and you don't want that. So I always carry a pair of scissors when I'm doing these systems and cut off the emitter. I want the first emitter to be like 3 inches or further away from the valve itself. But I don't have the scissors in my pocket at this moment, but I'd cut off that first 2 centimeters there, and then set this up on to the barb. Now it's slidden over the barb, and now while holding the barb, I'm going to start, and it goes counterclockwise. This compresses the drip tape between the barb, this barbed end here, and the locking nut. Now this is on there very, very well, and it won't leak as long as you don't have the emitter right there at that point. There is going to be a few drops. It's going to come out just like each one of the emitter right there. And then if I need to shut this bed off, I just turn that valve, and I hope that makes sense. Then at the end of the header, you need to have another compression fitting at the end of it. And in this case, this ends up being a male end, and this allows you to blow the system out at the end of the season, and I'll open it up, let all the water out of the system, blow air through it if you want to, and then put the cap on. And I'd put it on loosely and not have the water there, so in case there is some water in a low spot that you didn't know, as the water expands, the air and water can escape through it without the washer being there and it being nice and loose. And again, even the washers that are in these caps, these end caps, I replace with those red rubber ones because you get a better seal. A lot of the things I'm going to be using at any time in a bucket and carry it around with me. Here's my scissors that I use to cut off the drip tape so I don't get an emitter in the compression fitting. Now they're all different type of hole punchers for the poly tape. For the poly line, the header line. This is one of the units. It allows you to put the poly line in there, hold it fairly securely, and poke a hole through it. There's some that are just basically like a little stab, like an awl, and that can punch a hole through it. What I ultimately found was this one here, which is adjustable both for 1/2 inch and 3/4, so it has this small fitting. So if I go to 1/2 inch, this little blue insert goes in here, and that reduces the size, and that comfortably holds it. You just have to remember, let me just take that out for a moment. So now without that blue adapter in there, it's set up for 3/4 inch. So when I set the 3/4 inch pipe in here, and it'll punch a hole really easily through this very accurately, and there's really no leaks I've had with any of these since doing it. The important thing is to know where the plunger is. So you see where the plunger is on this side. It's on the side with the blue handle. So you really, when you're positioning things, you want to make sure that your headers, and I'll show how I set up the header in just a moment. You want to make sure that your header's in the position where there's minimal kinks in it, where it's potentially a straight line, where it's not going to be a tripping hazard, and so that it's not being twisted, so that the drip tape connectors are all coming out parallel at the same level, and some of them aren't twisted down and some twisted up. So you really want to make sure you get your header line set up first, so that you've got this whole thing ready. Then you've got your header line, and you've got this hole punch, and once you've decided exactly where everything goes, you set this over it, and this is because of where this is where the hole will be. So if I press this spot right here, it popped the hole through easily, and you see it's going to be exactly where I wanted it to be. So, and it's not too big a hole. This little hole punch is the best darn thing if you're going to be working with the drip tape systems, and this one doesn't come with the kits either. So a moment ago I showed you using the compression fitting with the valve so that you can turn on and turn off the drip tape at each end. But let's say, like in my garden here, since all my rows, since I don't have a dual header at both ends, last year I did, but it got to be a little bit unmanageable, and I won't go into all the details about that right now. But I decided to not use, to put a header at the other end and not use the shutoff valves at the other end as well. And it's much less expensive just to use a tape, what I'm going to call a termination end, which is the same way. It just has a little loop at the back side of it, and it still has the barbed part that the drip tape slips into, and that little twist lock that goes over it. So again, you want to make sure that there isn't an emitter right at that point. Make sure that your nut is your locking cap is all the way back towards the opposite end. Put it over the system, slide it in, twist it. Now that thing's locked right on. You can put a garden stake in the other end of it to hold it there, and you can make sure that your blue lines are straight up. One other thing I would say is, if these are exposed out in the sun, like with my carrot beds, the heat, the warmth of the sun, being that this is black, is going to make them expand some, and they're going to twist a little bit. So having it so that the other end you've got this locked down can be beneficial as well. Okay, another thing that I think is important is getting some of these, I think they call them goof plugs. And this little string here, there's 8 of them. Just mold it come out of a plastic mold, and they've got 2 different sides to it. So it's similar to the barbed end. So as I showed before, one of these valves that go into the header actually has a barbed end that goes through the hole punch that I put in the header that fits there. Well, let's say you punch the hole in the wrong spot, or you've used the same header last season, which you'll see in a few moments. When I use this header here, I'm taking out some of these, and instead of leaving these there where potentially the valve could get turned, or I could step on it and create more pressure in it, I like to have as few of these there, only the ones that are actually being used. So I'll use one of these goof plugs. And if you look at the size of those together, you'll see that this side, the larger side close to the central axis here, is exactly the same size as this, and you just pop one of these goof plugs in the header when you take one of these out, or you make a mistake and say, that's not where I wanted the drip tape, I wanted it 2 inches to the side. So these goof plugs help you to fix any of the mistakes that you make along the way. And one other thing that I'd say is handy, it's working in the garden, you want it to be as pleasant of an experience as possible. And sometimes you buy these different garden hoses and all, and you get a cheap hose and it kinks too easy because it's too long, you got too much loops there, or you're tripping over the garden hose and all, or somebody's throwing away a garden hose, and you can cut it up into pieces to fit the needs of going between beds. And some of the beds over there in the easternmost garden plot, I use small sections from 3 foot to 12 foot garden hose. And instead of having the garden hose coiled up, I cut up the garden hose and put these garden hose connectors. And I'll try to remember to put a connect. So this is a male Pro Mender. This is made by Orbit as well. And so you just cut the garden hose, you slip the pipe clamp over the hose, and then you slide the barbed end of these brass connectors into it. And you just pay attention whether you need a male or a female. And I buy a bunch of these every few years. And again, I replace the washer, whatever the washer is that comes with the system, and put the red rubber ones, because they have the cheap black plastic ones. The thing is, the two common sizes that these come in, you just want to make sure of the size of the hose, the internal diameter of the hose. So many hoses are 3/4 inch and many are 5/8 of an inch. These are 5/8 of an inch, so I want to use this with a 5/8 inch hose. So it's just one of the ways. And then I just always carry one of my, it's like a screwdriver, but it's just a little nut socket that fits over the ends of these hose clamps that go on the outside of the hose to compress the hose between the clamp and the barbed end of these adapters. So those are the components. Let's see if I can show how I'm going to do this. So the first thing I'm going to do is lay the header out, and I actually laid it out beforehand, but then when I came in and did all the transplants, I moved the header back. So I'm going to reposition it again in just a moment, and hopefully you'll be able to see how I position it close to the end. I'm keeping in mind to make the header so I'm not going to be tripping over it, that I can potentially be putting more wood chips over it, because the header's black, the sun's going to hit that bit of pipe, and it's going to heat up the water in there. So if you're watering your plants during the daytime and you're in a sunny location, that first water may come out as being hot water, and you want to try and avoid that. So you may be covering up that header line if at all possible. Okay, we just ran the drip tape out to where we want it. It's longer than what we need for here. Here you may be able to see a little bit of a crimping action or a pinched action on the tip of this at the end. Next thing I'm going to do is look for where the next emitter is. So there's an emitter right here. So I'm just going to use the scissors and just trim off a little bit of this. Put this in my bucket. And I've determined that this is the location that I want to have the emitter and the valve to come out. And I've got this held down with the bags, sandbags or rock bags. I'll end up building the chips up a little bit so that it isn't having to work too much, and then I'll be covering this over with chips. And then later on in the next video I'll show you how we lay the weed mats down over this system. So I'm going to take one of the valves, make sure it's all the way turned. It can go two ways. That's where it's pinching down on the drip tape. Here's where it's not pinching down on it. I'm just going to push it in. Alright, so she's on there really well. Now I'm holding it right there and I'm pinching it. So now I like the blue tape in line with the valve itself. So when I turn it off, it's like this. When I turn it on, it's like this. And put it right up against the base of the plants. And I've determined, so the hole is going to punch through from the side, the piston's right here. Now if I wanted it to be up, I'd have it kink up like this. But I think what I'm going to do is just put it just like this right here. Punch a hole. Now I've got a pinhole right here. I'll poke this through, wiggle a little bit, you hear the snap. That end's all hooked up right now. So we're all set, and that's the height at which I'm going to want to have the wood chips. Now I'm going to move to the next spot. I want to know where the tape is, so I'm going to consistently put the drip tape on the same side of the plants all the way down, so I know whereabouts they are when I'm putting garden stakes, mat stakes into the soil. I know that there's less of a chance that I'm going to penetrate one of these tapes. So I don't want this drip tape here, and I don't want it here. So I'm going to need to use 2 of those goof plugs in those locations. So first thing I'm going to do is take this one out here. Make sure that this is all the way back so I can put it in here. I'm actually going to trim that end off. The emitter starts right there. Just going to cut that last little bit off. Slide it on nice and snug. Hold it right here. Start. Again, I want to move both of these this way a little bit. And when I tighten this, the drip tape's on the top, and it'll go right through, and it's in there nice and snug. But I'm going to want this right about here. So again, the plunger's on this side, the blue handle. Going to make sure that it's fairly parallel, just slightly up. Pop the hole through, put that in. Good. One of these buggers right it. I have to lubricate this. Needle nose pliers aren't working that great. I'll just pop that goof plug off. There's the sides of the hole. Pop the goof plug in. We're set. Pop this one out. Again, set it to the side. I'll be using that. Grab the next goof plug. Pop it off. There we go. Now, will there be a little bit of tiny leaking? Well, with the sun hitting this plastic's going to expand some and help to seal off that hole a bit. All right, so right now we've got 2 drip tapes, 2 beds already set. The other ends are wide open. So when I turn this on, I'm going to flush the line out in case there's any debris in the line. So let's go to the next spot. Okay, I've got the drip tape set so that it's each one of them is coming off of one of these valves that can be shut off. The first 2 valves I have open over here right now. And what I'll be doing is turning the system on. I've already gone ahead down to the other end of each one of the drip tapes, and I've trimmed each one of the drip tapes. They're in line with the plants. They'll be closer to the plants when I finally set it up. But each one of those drip tapes are cut off at the appropriate spot so that one of the little aqua pores where the water is going to come through isn't where the termination end is. But the next step will be to go ahead, turn on the water. I'll run 2 of these lines at one time. Make sure there's no debris in the line, flush it right out with the open ends. The rest of the whole system is shut off. Once I get these 2 terminated, I'll turn these ones off, turn the next 2 open, flush them out, then terminate those lines as well with end caps. Well, I hope that I fairly thoroughly went over the whole drip irrigation system, so in case someone is contemplating using a drip irrigation system, you at least have some basic ideas of at least my take on the important factors. One is certainly larger diameter piping, your supply line and your headers, having those larger to meet future needs and give you adequate volume. 2, using the shutoff valves at the header so that you can isolate those tracks and you don't have to take the whole system down if there's a leak or there's damage, or in our case sometimes a cat might grab a hold of one of those drip tapes and chew it, which increases water loss. So the drip tape system has worked very well. I've only had a couple of failures. If there's comments or questions about that, please ask down below. I will put some links, some affiliate links to some of the Amazon place, and I'll show you, and I'll put a link to Drip Depot and Drip Works below. I do recommend, if you like the idea of using the valves and using the different termination zones, that you don't necessarily buy the kit, you buy the individual components, and they can be purchased through Amazon as well. But if you have any questions, please ask them below, and share any comments that you've had with your drip irrigation system and how that's worked with for you as well. So far, this is year 3. It's been working great for us. We just keep an eye on it every morning to make sure everything's going well. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, hit the bell icon if you want to be notified when we post more videos. And by all means, folks, have a fantastic day. Bye-bye now.